everybody, and welcome to the SoxProspects.com podcast, the web's #1 source for information on the Boston Red Sox from top to bottom, from Fort Myers to Worcester, across the Pike to Fenway, and all stops in between. Thank you all for listening. My name is Chris Hatfield. I am the executive editor of Sox Prospects. This is Ian Kundle. He is the director of scouting of Sox Prospects. And Ian, terrific episode today featuring an interview we just recorded with Red Sox director of pitching, Justin Willard. I know it's someone you in particular have really wanted to get on the show for a long time. Just a terrific discussion with Justin today.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. It was great to kind of pick his brain for about an hour about pitching. I think it's really interesting. We hit on a lot of kind of like general ideas, and we also get in deep on some players. I thought it was just a really insightful interview.
Yeah, and I think it's going to open up a lot of people's eyes to like what he does. You know, he's not just the minor league pitching development guy. His job is a lot more than that. And B, I think there's a lot of detail and thoughts about what goes into pitching development. You know, I think a lot of people have developed this in Breslow we trust attitude that's really, Andrew Bailey, Justin Willard, like all, a lot of minor league pitching guys. There's a lot that goes into it. Analytics, strength and conditioning, and he talks about all of that. And I think it's really going to give some insight into that process for people who may not understand what goes into it. So really pumped to give people that interview coming up on this episode. We're also going to talk International Free Agent Signing Day. Today is January 15th. It is the annual signing day for international free agents. It's the opening of the international signing period. The Red Sox signed their latest group of international free agents today. We're going to talk about that class. It's a good one. We'll tell you more in a bit. And of course, the Red Sox pulled off a trade today. Not pulled off, but they made a trade today for another catcher. So again, I think we kind of talked about how that's a piece that's sort of dangling there, although it seemed like Carlos Narvaez was the guy.
That's a loose term.
I guess that's true. He does a few things. We'll
Yeah.
talk about Blake Sabol, the newest member of the Red Sox organization, and that trade today. But first, before we go any further, some ways you can support the show. First, spread the word. Tell your neighbor. Tell your local director of pitching. I don't know. I haven't thought of a good one for this one, but yeah, I guess when you meet someone for the first time on Zoom, tell them about the podcast. Spread the word. You can also help us out by rating and reviewing us on whatever it is that you listen to us on, whether it's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iTunes, etc. And you can also support us on patreon.com/SoxProspects and get some perks for your support of the show. And of course, send your emails to podcast@soxprospects.com. We want to talk about what you all want to hear about. We're not going to do emails today because we've already got an hour-long interview and we've got some news to talk about, but we'll get at them soon. Our next episode, we're planning on it being another interview, so it might be a couple of episodes down the line, but maybe if it's a slow news week, we'll hit a couple of emails before the on our next episode. Unsure, but still send them in. We will get to them eventually. Ian, news. Let's start with the international free agent signing class. It's looking like a good one. I think, this is a group that I think the team is very excited about. I was actually very surprised that in the Sabol trade, just to kind of get ahead of ourselves a little bit, the Red Sox traded international free agent signing bonus money for Sabol, who had been DFA'd by the Giants.
But that also could be like $100K for all we know. We don't know the total.
Well, it's got to be. I think it's 250K increments.
Okay, maybe it was 250K then.
Right,
but we don't know exactly.
Yeah, it may not have been a lot. And one of the points that I do want to make is because every year we get when are they going to go in and sign a $3 million or $5 million guy? Why aren't they spending on these big, signings? That they have to think the player's worth it. B, with that kind of mentality, with the way the international market works, the sooner you're in on a guy, the sooner you identify a talent, it may not cost as much to sign them.
Yeah.
Right. So you're kind of dinging them for doing a good job. I'm not saying nothing they do is wrong and like the guys are always great bargains. No, that's not what I'm saying at all. I'm just saying you can't be that myopic in how you look at it, and you can't just focus on why haven't they signed a, X million whatever guy. Look at what the guys become and what they do when they come stateside. That's what you need to evaluate them on. We've talked about how they do a great job of identifying guys who sign for 5 figures and become major leaguers, Brian Bayo, et cetera. But we also have to, you have to look at, even if it's like a, 1 million or 1.4 million guy, maybe that's a guy who, if they hadn't identified him as early, becomes a 1.8, $2.5 million guy that they got early. So you can't really ding them for the fact that they got that guy at a better price, that they now have more money on a hard international free agent spending cap, that they can take that money and apply it elsewhere. So that is my rant. Ian, do you want to talk a little bit about this class, some of the players? It looks we've got scouting reports on the top five or so guys that we tuned up and put up this morning. But like I said, generally this seems like a class that the team is really, really excited about. And I think that when people see our rankings update next week, it's going to reflect a little bit in this being maybe a better class than they've had in a little bit of time.
Definitely. I think especially when you compare it to last year, where obviously the guys came in a lot of struggles, I would say, especially at the top of last year's class, maybe some sleepers later on.
Yeah.
But this one, I feel like there's definitely a different vibe. The top guy, especially Dorian Soto, he got the biggest bonus, somewhere around 1.2 million, 1.4 million. He's really exciting, and I think he checks a lot of the boxes you kind of look
Mhm.
for when you're
Yep.
talking about the prototypical shortstop in the international market. He's listed at 6'3", 185. Might not be a shortstop. It's all going to depend on how he fills out, but really good swing, has bat speed already, pretty good swing decisions, raw power already, potential like plus power as he physically matures. Like there's a really high offensive ceiling here. And I think being able to get someone who's seen, as potentially like a borderline top 10 talent in the system for 1.2, 1.4 million, somewhere in that range, underscores what you were saying about how, the key is it's not the bonus amount. It's, identifying these guys early. And I think another, actually, frankly, a really good example of that is what happened with the Dodgers. I don't know if you saw this, but one of the guys they lost, they were signing for 900K. He went back on the open market because I'm assuming the Dodgers are going to get
Yeah.
Sasaki.
Should we pause real quick and update on Sasaki?
Well, he's not coming to Boston.
He's not coming to Boston, and it seems like he's
Um,
narrowed it to the Dodgers, Padres, and Blue Jays, and some
but
Dodgers and Padres IFA commits are back on the market.
yeah,
So,
and well, the Dodgers lost the guy who they had agreed to for 900K. He got 1.8 million from the Pirates.
mhm.
So I think that just shows what you were saying, that it's not necessarily the bonus you got from a team, because if
Great
they were
point.
on the market, another team might be able to willing to give them more. So I think Dorian Soto is someone really exciting. It seems like the Red Sox are very high on him. He's a really potential high end talent. Checks a lot of the boxes you look for. I feel like if you look at the top guys they've got over the last couple of years, all of them had something that it was like, oh, this they didn't check all those boxes where Soto does, is basically what I'm saying. Um, so that's a really exciting guy at the top of the system, kind of anchoring the class. But then you move down, and I think that in kind of talking with people who have seen these players, that there's there's excitement beyond just the top guys. Like this has a chance to be a very deep class, and I think that there's a lot of intriguing skill set here. A lot of up the middle talent, obviously. A lot of athleticism. A lot of guys who can defend and have a chance to defend and hit. And then so I think Harold Rivas, no, none more so than him. He's someone who listed at 6'2", 170. Um, elite athlete, like top of the scale athleticism, really good arm, run, field, like the defense, the arm, the speed is all there.
Center
Really good
fielder.
hit. Yeah, center fielder, hits the ball extremely hard. The question is, how's the hit tool? How's the contact ability going to be? And how much power is he actually going to tap into? But when you got that kind of defense, that's a really good thing to fall back on. So he's another really exciting talent.
Mhm.
I'm just going down by what we have for bonuses.
Yes, he's the second largest bonus. Yep.
Correct. The third largest bonus was Elier Alfonso. He's a shortstop out of
I think it's
Venezuela.
Eliezer. This is
Eliezer. Yep, you're right.
yeah.
Miss that Z. He's another switch hitter, kind of a trend you'll
Yeah,
hear.
I noticed a bunch of switch hitters in this class, which
Yeah.
is interesting. Even some of the like lower bonus guys.
Yeah. But he seems like kind of like less projectable, kind of similar to some of the guys they've signed these last few years.
Mhm.
He's listed 5'11. He's 5'11. Hit over power type, maybe gets into like doubles power, but good chance to stick up the middle. High baseball IQ. I think that's a trend we saw with a lot of these guys. Is guys like great work ethic, really smart. Smart baseball players know how to play the game, instinctual. So he's someone who's pretty interesting. Next up is actually this is the one that interests me a lot because we've talked often about how they don't spend a lot on pitchers in the international market. Big money. They'll
They
they'll
don't.
give
Yep.
they'll sign a bunch of
And,
them, but
and no one
they're
does too, by the
no,
way.
no.
Like
I
no
mean, if
one
you
is
looked at
signing a yeah,
I was looking at Badler's like list of
ranked by
like the highest
bonus.
bonuses. Yeah, and I think there were
There's
like
no
10
pitchers.
pitchers
Yeah.
on the entire list or something.
Of 50, right? It goes
No, it
50
was
deep.
100.
Oh, of 100. No
Yeah, I
kidding.
can't
Okay.
remember exactly. It might have been only 50 when I was looking, but there were not a lot
Yeah,
of pitchers is my point.
sure.
And so for them to give 500K to a pitcher, they must really like him, and I think they do in Sadbil Delzine.
Mhm.
He has a hilarious video. I don't know if you can find if you haven't, go look for it on Twitter of him pitching to I don't know what level of
Oh God.
competition, but it
It
looks like he's
looks
facing a T-ball team
it
because
looks
this
like when
guy
you would
is a
play those
specimen.
it looks like when you would play those like acclaim video games and you'd put in the code to like
Oh, to shrink them, to like
to
shrink the
shrink
batters.
or grow like players. It
Yeah.
looks fake.
Yeah,
It
because
looks
he's
completely
so
fake.
he's listed at he's 17. I think he just turned 17.
He turned
He's
17 like a week ago.
Yeah, so he's listed at 6'4", 6'5", like 190, but he's actually closer to 220 now. I
Is
think
what
he's
we've heard.
6'4",
Yep.
220.
Yep.
So he's just a huge human being. And
For 17. Yeah.
for 17. And it's a really high upside arm. Fastball is already up to 94, low 90s right now. Both changeup and curveball show good potential with changeup, especially like really high. They're really high on that pitch. So I think that and then you got the curveball too. I think Bandler highlighted the curveball as being the better of the secondary. So it kind of varies depending on who
Interesting.
you talk to there.
Hmm.
So but two usable secondaries. He's got a fourth pitch also. So
Slider.
just a really interesting arm, high upside type with a starters build already
Mhm.
that I think when they're given 500K to a pitcher, it means something. So I'm really excited to see him.
And
And then
actually, if I could jump in real quick, Dalvinson Reyes is a guy we're really high on from last year's class. I could say I talked to someone who I said Reyes or Delzine, did not hesitate and said Delzine, like did not pause. So that's not to say we're going to start Delzine in our rankings where Reyes is. I think there's something to coming in and showing you can do it, and
Mhm.
seeing what you can, not necessarily results from the DSL, but getting reports, hearing about what a guy's doing, etc. You do have to kind of pump the brakes on young pitchers a little bit, but
Yeah,
that's
long
high
way to
praise.
go.
Yes.
But yeah, definitely. And then rounding out the top five of the class, bonus wise, you have Hector Ramos, who is a another shortstop another switch hitting shortstop out of this time
Right.
from the Dominican. Showed good feel from both sides, solid contact skills. Power's kind of a little fringier, but average speed, good defender. Again, like reliable, strong, accurate arm, good work ethic, gets the most out of his tools. Seems like it seems like they're focusing on getting both guys with upside, but also just like good dudes who love baseball.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really good strategy when you're talking about the international market because, I mean, even the Red Sox have fallen in this in the past. There can be guys who have all the talent in the world, but if they go down the wrong road or they're not committed to the game, they're never going to reach their potential.
Yep.
So, yeah, no, I think that with those five kind of anchoring it, and then there's obviously as we get more information, we'll kind of fill out the reports on the rest of them. But I think it's a really nice base with that group of players right there.
Yeah, they're really happy with it. And I think the reports we've gotten on guys, like I said, you'll see reflected in. We're going to update our rankings next
Yeah,
week,
next week.
probably.
Yeah,
So, I think, usually it's one or two guys ranked from a given class, and that's what it's been the past few years. It's going to be more than that this year.
yeah,
So,
yep,
yeah, really interesting crew of guys. Some other guys that we've heard that shortstop, left-handed hitting shortstop, Jorman Bravo or Jorman, I don't know how it's pronounced. A potential interesting sleeper type. Gio Michael Martinez is another guy we heard who's a low dollar, good athlete, center fielder who might be a player. So a couple of names there to keep an eye out, potential sleepers. And, look, this time last year, we weren't talking about Justin Gonzalez, for example. Guys will always break out
exactly.
who you weren't talking about. So we'll see.
Well,
We'll
that's
see.
what I was saying. Like you look at last year's class, like Vladimir Asensio really struggled, Carlos Cascarel really struggled. I think those were their top two bonus guys.
They were, and
So
they both might be repeating the DSL. Moving on, the Red Sox also made a small trade today, Ian, trading international bonus pool space. We don't know how much like we were just talking about, for Blake Sable from the San Francisco Giants, a guy who. So it's interesting. I admittedly did not do the deep dive on him because I was at work, but and not that you weren't doing anything either. But I'm just saying why I haven't done the deep dive on him. I know he also has played outfield and some first base in the minors. He played more first base than outfield last year, but previously he has played more outfield than first base.
Hmm.
A guy who can play other positions. But my initial thought was he's a 40-man guy because he was designated for assignment. The Red Sox traded for him. Struck me as kind of a come in to maybe not compete with Carlos Narvaez for the backup spot, but a guy who's in camp in the picture potentially. But he also has two options. One just over 1 year of service times. They've got him for 5 years. Um, just another name for the 40-man roster for the catching soup, who probably goes to AAA and is that third catcher who's on the 40-man roster, who maybe could do a couple of other things as well. What say you about Blake Sable? You got anything on him?
Just that, I mean, came in, made some noise in 2023. He actually got 344 plate appearances in the majors, hit 235, 301, 394, 13 home runs. Um, it's, low OBP, a lot of strikeouts, but like for a catcher, it was good. I mean, you'll take that as a catcher, but 34% K rate, little concerning. Not a guy like he drastically outperformed his expected numbers in 2023, and concerningly, his blocks above average was in the first percentile. Is among the worst in all of baseball. Like below average pop time too. So he's not necessarily known for
Sorry,
his
his walks
defense.
above average, you said?
No, his blocks above average. He
Blocks.
was a
Got it.
very,
Okay.
very not a very good defensive catcher, is what I'm trying to say.
Got it. Okay.
Um,
Cool, cool.
but in 2024, he only got 38 plate appearances in the majors, 313, 421, 375. Uh, whiff rate, he brought it down a little bit. Obviously, small sample, so we'll see. And the
Wasn't really
defense,
hitting in the PCL either.
yeah, and the defense, there wasn't like a big enough sample, but it seemed a little better. But I think I do wonder if the Red Sox just think that with this new catching instructor, they brought in the guy from the Yankees. I do wonder if they think they can coach him up, because I do look at the Yankees, and Austin Wells was a very bad defender at one point in his career, and they
Mhm.
turned him into an above average defender last year.
Sure.
So maybe they can work with Sable and get him to being like an adequate defender. Because if you can play three positions, have a little pop, and play some defense, like at least at an average level, that's a very worthy third catcher candidate. So I think it's a solid depth move. Like they needed, we talked about in the last episode, they needed bodies in AAA,
Mhm.
and this means that either him or
Sebi,
Narvaez
Sebi,
is going to
oh,
be. No, I was just saying, but him or Narvaez is going to be in AAA now, and gives
yep.
them another guy you will probably be playing every day.
Exactly, exactly, and because they also already had Sebi Zavala as a depth catcher in AAA too. So
Exactly.
you're not relying on
Because you need four. Let's be honest. You need three guys on your 40 man, and then you need a fourth guy who you would trust enough if something if like catastrophic things happened.
Mhm.
So I think they're in a good spot with those four, assuming they can get Connor Wong to make some defensive strides, and Narvaez kind of plays like the level of player that I think they think he is.
Yep, exactly. The Red Sox also designated Chase Shugart for assignment. I think was it on the podcast last week, or was it just in our own discussions
I
that
think it
you
was
and I
before.
both kind of had the thought of,
Maybe he's going to make it.
maybe he's going to make it to spring training. He
Yeah,
did kind of seem
I bet
like
he gets claimed
you
because
think,
his stuff.
yeah, well,
Yeah, he's got enough to work with.
righty
That I
reliever, I guess. I don't
that's
know.
options. Bring him into camp.
Yeah, see what
But
he's got. If you think you add a pitch or something, yeah, I could
yeah.
see it. I could
But
see it.
I think it made sense. Like when you looked at the 40-man depth chart, they just have so many righty pitchers in AAA on the team
Right.
that they needed to balance it out. They needed hitters. So it makes sense.
Exactly. So yeah, I mean, we'll see. We'll see what happens with that. The only other thing, I guess, the only other kind of news piece was the Red Sox maybe have signed a minor league free agent deal with old friend Robert Stock, stereotypical journeyman reliever who won the triple crown in the Mexican Pacific League this winter as a starter, dropping to a like sidearm arm slot. But you may remember
No, it's
him
like
from
it's not sidearm, but it's
it's
like
like
low
three
three
He's calling
quarters.
it
Yeah,
sidearm, but it's low three
he's
quarters.
slinging
It's
the
like,
ball. He's still throwing
yeah,
like 96, but yeah,
yeah, it's a sinker now instead of the four seam he threw when he made 10 appearances for the team in 2020, which you may remember or may have blocked from your mind. So,
great
uh,
Twitter follow though.
yeah, no, in the sense of like, it's not like he's just being crazy. He's not posting,
No, it's
about
like
his
interesting.
it's interesting stuff about pitching, about him and other pitchers. Like,
Yeah.
you know, he has tweets that are like, you know, comparing Garrett Cole's mechanics next to each other and stuff like that. He is also very funny, but it's an interesting social media follow. So check it
But
out.
I mean, again, it's just more depth.
More depth. Love the depth. Love the depth. And speaking of depth, we were not out of our depth in talking. It's a terrible transition. We really enjoyed talking with Justin Willard. Ian, I guess we should probably maybe intro a little bit with who Justin Willard is. Justin Willard is the Red Sox Director of Pitching, is the title. He came in last November from the Minnesota Twins, where I think he had more of a traditional title of like it was, you know, pitching coordinator or something to that effect. But
Mhm.
as he talks about a little bit in this, you know, he came in and he's not just the minor league pitching development guy. You know, this is not the pitching coordinator who just oversees them. He's involved. He has his fingers in a lot of other pies in player acquisition. You know, doesn't stop when a guy walks through the doors at Fenway. You know, he's involved up there as well. It's all pitching throughout the organization and all aspects of pitching. So this is again, this is not just the minor league guys talking about a minor league guy. This is a key figure in the organization. If the Red Sox change in philosophy and pitching is interesting to you, this is an interview you should listen to. He talks
Definitely.
about a lot of different stuff. This isn't just like, you know, we're using TrackMan data or you know, high speed cameras with our A ball guys, and here is what we are teaching them. No, it's much more involved than that. I don't know, any particular highlights that you think folks should listen in for, Ian, or particularly interesting pieces of our conversation with Justin that stand out to you looking back?
I think the talk about last year's draft class and some of the guys in there is really interesting.
Sure.
Especially since
The
those
group.
guys are kind of like the out of sight, out of mind because we haven't seen them on the mound for the most part yet. But
Hmm. Hmm.
it was really interesting hearing kind of him talk about Dayton Tully and some of the others and some of the processes and what they're kind of going through and doing right now.
Yep. And we talked about some of the other guys, you know, David Sandlin, Hunter Dobbins, some of the top pitchers in the system, you know, what they've been working on, what they need to work on, what led to some of the results they had, et cetera. So, a really interesting interview, um, you know, with a guy who's now entering his second year in the organization, after getting a full off season with guys. Really excited to have y'all hear this. So, I guess we won't come back on the other side, Ian. So let's wrap up real quick on the front end. Make sure, thank you all for listening, of course, as always. Make sure you follow the site and follow us on social media. You can follow the site at Sox Prospects. Follow Ian at Ian Cundall. That's IANCUNDALL. And follow me at SP Chris Hatfield. Thank you to the Ludlow Thieves for our intro and outro music. All the money. Get that, listen to their stuff wherever it is that you listen to music. Um, Thank you to Daniel Fox, our podcast producer. And thank you to our supporters on patreon.com/Sox Prospects. This episode, we want to shout out Jeff Trainer, Tim Harding, James O'Hara, Nate, David B., Al Mendel, Kevin Catrides, James Bailey, Andreas Goldstrand, Forrest Perkins, and Mark Herman. Thank you all for your support. And thank you to all of our Patreon patrons for their support of the show as well. Thank you all for listening. Enjoy this interview with Justin Willard. We'll be back in your eardrums. Should have an episode next week. So keep your eyes on and ears to the feed. Thanks for listening, everybody. All right. Well, we are now extremely pleased to be joined by the Red Sox Director of Pitching, someone we've wanted to get on the show for a while here since he came to the organization last offseason, and Justin Willard. Justin, thank you so much for taking the time out to chat with us, to come on the show. We're really excited to talk some pitching. I know Ian especially has been clamoring for this for a while. So welcome to the show, and I guess, you know, how have things been going this off season? What's going on as we sit here in mid-January in your world as you know, as director of pitching for the org? Certainly a lot happening at a time when people maybe don't necessarily have visibility on it. So what is going on in your world these days in the off season?
Yeah, well, first of all, appreciate the invite, and yeah, it just never stops between obviously some big trades happen this off season, and then we have some minor league free agent signs as well as NRI invites and things along those lines, and then we have currently about 30 pitchers down in Fort Myers. They're going on to week two of being down there, coming out of the dead period, which is pretty exciting. MLB baseball threw a nice little curveball at all of us with the dead period. Guys go dark for a pretty significant amount of time, right in the most important part of their buildup, and just trying to gauge where everybody's at, and then start some off-season programming.
It does seem like the off season has become so much more of a focus in recent years in player development, which makes sense. It was always, maybe a little silly of this kind of like we're going to play games for this number of months and we'll, the season ends and we'll see you in February. Um, kind of how has that transition looked from your perspective as as that focus has ramped up and we've gone from fall instructs to now this whole off season program where guys are in Fort Myers, other than the dead period, pretty much all off season.
Yeah, it's a really cool transition that baseball's made, and some teams are more ahead of it than others. But being with the Twins previous to this, we really capitalized and looked at the calendar from a full year rather than just the baseball season, right? And
Mhm.
how can we develop the entire athlete, not just specifically the pitcher, and understanding, okay, at what points in which in the year can we really tackle certain problems
Mhm.
while we're allocating essentially weight to certain things more than we would necessarily in the season, right? At some level in the season, you have to perform, so we can't necessarily put on the weight and size that we want you to, right? So can we do that in the off season when we've kind of rearranged the priorities to really attack some of those low-hanging fruits?
Mhm. Mhm. So it's more like you don't have to worry about going out and pitching every, sixth day, I guess, with the 6 man rotation that y'all use this year. And I definitely want to ask about that. But it just kind of gives you that opportunity to maybe focus in on certain development points. Is that fair that you may not get
Yeah,
to during the
that's
season?
that's a perfect representation, right? Especially I'm not a big believer in guys shutting down full time from throwing. So, okay, as we ramp down volume and intensity of throwing, we can ramp up volume and intensity in other areas, and specifically looking at S&C and medical as well as nutrition. Can we kind of tackle some of those big rocks, knowing that, okay, at some point in the off season, we have to make that transition to really focus on um, the skill of pitching, the skill of throwing, the skill of pitch shapes, and those types of things.
Mhm. And I guess maybe backing up a little bit for our listeners here, as the director of pitching for the Boston Red Sox, like what is within your purview? Is it just all pitchers in the org? I mean, I would say outside of Boston, but there's obviously some overlap because guys are going up and down. Kind of what are you overseeing and what are aspects to that? Because you just named a bunch, strength and conditioning, nutrition, fit, all these aspects. It's not just get on the mound and throw fastball, curveball, changeup, everyone in the system now apparently sweeper. Kidding, of course, but what is entailed in kind of the maybe not the day to day responsibility, but what is your kind of a realm of what you're overseeing and what your fingers are in, what pies your fingers are in.
Yeah, so this is part of the reason why I took this job. So my title is I oversee essentially all pitching. So me and Bales have a very, very good relationship. We're talking daily. Um, so overseeing big league programming as well as minor league programming, and any acquisitions we're looking to make, I'll have a voice in those decisions, whether it's pro or amateur or international. Just really try to hone in our processes from the big leagues all the way to the DR, and what are we doing? What are we doing? What are we looking to acquire? What kind of essentially problems or skills can we solve? And that's the reason why I took this job. When I was with the Twins, it was more of just okay, minor leagues, not really much oversight of the big leagues. And I thought there was a huge opportunity to continue that development at the big league level, and Brez saw it very similarly, and I think that's part of the reason we're now working together.
Mhm. There's the fact that the big boss is a former pitcher, right? I mean, how much does that make this almost a more attractive place to be, where it's like you're not going to have to explain some of this stuff to Craig Breslow, where he's been there, he's done it for years, and then he also has thought about it in his initial jobs with the Cubs, who are heavily focused on pitching too. Does that really help you with what you do on a day to day and what you're doing in your role?
Oh, no, definitely, right? At the end of the day, he did this job. So anytime I have a question or concern or thought or want to ping something off him, like he's a cubicle away or an office away. Additionally, like there's not too many guys out there like Perez or Bales, and I can't give them enough credit for changing the culture here with the Red Sox, specifically in the pitching realm. You have two guys that played in the big leagues for a long time, Breads obviously like did it as a crafty lefty essentially for a very long time, and Bales being an all-star and had a rookie of the year, significant amount of success at the major league level, and they all believe these things and they preach these things, and that carries just a whole different weight when the guys at the top are saying the same things as myself.
Yeah, and then so I mean, I guess in that position, what is your personal view? And I know this is kind of the 10,000-foot question, and if there were an easy answer, we'd have 13 pitchers on every team with perfect arsenals, etc. But um, what is your approach to pitching development to pitch, and not necessarily saying like drafty or IFA as they come through the system, but just developing and teaching and honing pitchers. What is your approach to how that should work, what you are looking for, maybe what the tenets are that you are, examining, evaluating, as you mentioned in a piece of, your job that I think people maybe, I think I may not have fully grasped before today of, evaluating the types of players you're going to go get, evaluating what guys within the system are doing. What are the pieces to that that you really focus on and look to A, bring guys in with, and B, develop in order to get them as successful as they can be at the major league level?
Yeah, I've thought a lot about this over the last 6, 7 years, and it really kind of boiled down to throw nasty stuff in the zone, right?
Mhm.
It's
Not a
you have
bad
two
idea.
world. Yeah, like it's very simple, but as you branch out, it gets extremely complex, right? At the end of the day, like if you got nasty stuff, are you in the zone? And if you're in the zone, do you have nasty enough stuff, right? So understanding and boiling problems down to or skills down to those kind of two things of like, okay, what are we attacking with each individual player? Knowing that ultimately like velocity is the multiplier of all of this, right? Cool. You can have really good stuff and you have good process metrics, but hey, like it's not going to lead to big league success just because you don't have the sheer velocity to improve that floor of the stuff. Um, that's where all this stuff kind of ties in, and the players hear it almost daily. Just throw nasty stuff in the zone, and we're working towards that with every single individual that we acquire or that is currently in the system.
Mhm. And so I guess for a given pitcher, like what are the ways you can go about each of those? Because again, if it were as easy as just, there's a way that you improve strike throwing that is proven and works for everyone. Again, there'd be 13 pitchers on every team who don't walk anybody unless they want to, right? So same thing with velocity, same thing with stuff, breaking balls, etc. Um, so how do, I mean, maybe just starting with velocity because that's the one that people often come back to and that we've heard so much about with the org in the past year or so of the guys who get the I forget what the shirt says. I throw I
Oh
throw
yeah,
fuego. I throw
I throw
fuego
fuego.
shirts.
Yep.
Yeah. How do you go about with a given guy? Is it just as easy as plyometric balls? Is it as easy as pull downs, or is it, pitcher by pitcher? How do you, evaluate what a given guy can get up to and how you're going to get them to where they're going?
Yeah, it's a very holistic approach, right? Utilizing all departments. The biggest correlate to velocity for anybody is just body weight, right? So, okay, cool. Are you at a threshold to where your body can still move and function at a high level, but you've essentially maximized and topped out that. Additionally, there's obviously mechanics, there's shoulder strength, there's grip strength, there's all these different things that we can attack from the physical side to make sure we're maximizing. And that's where like the periodization of the off season or periodization of the entire year is super important. Additionally, like a lot of these guys have just never really tried to throw hard and taken the governor off of like, hey, let's work on throwing hard, right? Let's do that in season. Um, I'll be very blunt and just say like this is the most aggressive. This past season was the most aggressive I've ever been in season in velocity development, making sure we're still taking care of our guys and we're not overtaxing or overstressing the body. They can still go out and perform every 6 days. But hey, can we take some reps out of this bullpen and try to throw hard to see if we can unlock and take off that governor?
Mhm. And is part of that being, because one of the things we noticed that I alluded to is, at most, not every level, it wasn't in AAA, and there were times when y'all just didn't have the bodies, I think, to do it in AA this year. But the six-man rotation idea, where a guy is getting skipped basically every, did it work out to every sixth week? It was the week when your start would have fallen on Monday, you got skipped. Basically, it's like you started Tuesday, and you didn't pitch till the following Sunday. Is I think the way it wound up working out. Is that in part so you can do some of these things and be that aggressive and know that it's not like a guy's going to have to go out there, they're going to have this time where they've got, what does it work out to, 12 days before their next start or 11 days before their next start where you can work on such things like that. Is that, does that play into your ability to be that aggressive?
Yeah, 1000%. That's we started implementing that with the Twins in 2021 when I first got the job. And you just saw guys really take off and really utilize that time to do some cool things you necessarily can't do in a season when you're throwing every 5 or 6 days and you don't have that scheduled off day, right? Can we get a live BP going during that time, right? Where we can really reduce, you're not going out there and throwing 5 or 6 innings, but we can really reduce the overall volume, but you're getting some transfer of training because you're as close to the performance environment as possible.
Mhm, mhm. And then was there anyone who really popped for you, when you think of that kind of working on the velocity? I mean, there are plenty of guys we saw this year who just, all of a sudden they had a couple, I remember Ian texting about like Gabriel Jackson when he was in Greenville and being like, "Oh, hey, guess what he's throwing now?" And sure enough, he's in Portland soon thereafter. But were there any particular success stories this year that come to mind in terms of like working on that velocity and getting there?
Yeah, like there's a couple guys that really stand out that come to mind is like Blake Wehunt, kind of later round draft pick. We saw the physicality, saw the looseness, and it's like, okay, cool. Can we work on his physical development as well as velocity in season? He made some huge strides in terms of velocity, and additionally, like Connolly early was the player plan checker offer. Um, it was pretty impressive. Every time he put a goal in front of this kid, he checked it off, and it's like, okay, what's next? And it's like, it's not supposed to be this easy, big guy. Like, you're not supposed to be performing at a high level and checking off all these goals, including velocity development. It was like every 2 months. Okay, cool. You check that one off. Let's get the next mile per hour going. And he was really, really fun to watch. And he's actually one of the guys, him and Blake are actually down there right now, working through some programming as well.
Mhm. And you hit on something there that I was going to get to at some point, but maybe this is a good point to ask about it. With those individualized player development plans, how do you all come up with like what the goals are going to be for a given player? Like, are they, for a short term, long term? I mean, granted, like if a guy's throwing 89, I'm sure it's like, okay, well, let's get the velo up, right? But like, what's the process for coming up with what those dev goals are going to be, and how does that process work? If you can kind of give us a little bit of a peek into how that process works.
Yeah, the easiest way to describe it is we're looking at the over the plate the outcomes that are most predictive of future success, right? Like again, I want these guys to all perform in the minor leagues, but you guys are paying money to watch the big league team win baseball games, and that's really all that matters, right? So
Hmm.
we're using the things that are happening over the plate that again are predictive of future success, not necessarily current success, but future success. And then, okay, cool. Where are you lacking? And is it versus a certain batter hand, or how are we going to do these things to address this deficiency? And then we're picking the highest probabilistic outcome, right? At the end of the day, um, I use this reference a bunch with players, right? Paul Skeens was pocket rockets, right? Like you can still lose that hand, but odds are you're going to win. Odds are he's going to be pretty good. But a lot of these guys are dealt deuce seven off suit. Can we continue to attack the low hanging fruits to give you a better hand and a better chance of winning and reaching your dreams? Right. That's why we're in this business. Is can we help these guys get to the level they want to and reach those dreams and pitch at Fenway and help us win a World Series?
So it's not just give everyone a sweeper. It's
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 not.
a little
I can
more
promise it's
complicated.
not.
Kind of as a follow-up to that, how do you balance, especially when with the players, I'm assuming this can be difficult at times, of the kind of like the development goals and the process with the results? Because you have guys in like below minors, for example, who have one dominant pitch, and if they threw that pitch 70% of the time, they probably cruise to that level. How hard can it be to convince them, hey, you need to work on this other stuff, or you're not going to reach your ultimate goal? And kind of what is the process between when you have a situation like that where you have a guy with, let's say a guy who has two dominant breaking balls, but his fastball shape is really poor, or he struggles to locate his fastball? Like, how do you blend that with the development and then the results, especially when it comes to like guys in the low minors?
Yeah, no, it's definitely an interesting problem. It starts with the culture ultimately, and that was my coming in last year. That was the tallest task I was taking on is can we change the culture here to get it more objectively focused rather than some of the subjective or more variable outcomes that we've traditionally valued, right? Can you actually say, hey, this guy in low A projects to be a big league all-star? Right. And guys that are doing that are like JoJo Ingrassia, who's punching out 40%. Okay, that projects to be a pretty good big leaguer, right? But it's still against low A opponents, and we know it's going to get tougher as we go up levels. And it's really centering around that culture of, hey, the most important thing is attacking these player playing goals because this is the most predictive thing of future success, not just current success. And then you have guys like Connolly Early who do both, and they're great examples of what it should look like.
And I guess for individual players who come in, like when do you know, or how do you identify something that's just a unique to a player versus something that, even if it's leading to success at the given time, is going to need to get tweaked? And for example, I remember when the Red Sox drafted Tanner Houck, and there was this whole thing about how we're going to tweak his mechanics. He's going to go from throwing a sinker to a four seam. We're going to change it from a slider to like I think it was a more, yeah, it was like a knuckle curve, 12-6 type deal. Maybe not 12-6 given the arm angle, but there was all these tweaks he was going to make. And it's like, look, the results might not be there, but down the line. And then at some point it was like, okay, maybe he should throw the sinker and slider, right? How do you identify the difference between something unique to this guy that you don't necessarily want to have cookie cutter pitchers all the way up, versus something that, okay, maybe we need to dial this back and tweak it? Is there anything that goes into it, or is it just more maybe art than science?
No, I think it's more science than art nowadays. But again, I think that's where a lot of people miss the boat in terms of all models are wrong, some are useful, right? Like I live and die by that. Like we all have these predictive models for in every organization, and there's guys that beat it, right? Why did the Rays trade Joe Ryan to the Twins? Because they couldn't really understand his fastball. They're like, this is not going to work at the big league level, right? And it did continue to work at the big league level, just not the third time through the order, right? And the guy had, and that's where focusing on the performance problems really help us dictate, okay, what's working? Because there's situations where our models just aren't capturing what's really going on. Additionally, all models are looking in the past, right? And we know hitters are training better, hitters are getting better information, their advanced reporting's better, they can adjust their swings more, whatever it may be, right? Like they are also adjusting to what our players are trying to do. So that's where, again, focusing on what's actually happening over the plate and really trying to address those problems when they come up is super, super important. Or else you run into those Tanner Houck situations where you almost have to backtrack because you had all these plans that sounded great, but hey, they just didn't work.
How do you identify then? I get like, so for example, specific pitch types that a player should learn. And listening to some interviews with guys who came in out of spring training, throwing three different pitches than they came in throwing. And, maybe that's oversimplifying, but, guys who, okay, we're going to teach you X, Y, and or Z, or guys that, okay, this arsenal works. Is it a matter of, seeing handedness splits versus, okay, we're tunneling where we want breaks, left and right, up and not up, but, IVB up versus, breaking down? What goes into an individual pitcher figuring out what should be, the pitch design, what should go in, is it mechanics? What are you looking at to determine, all right, we're going to teach Blake Wehunt this pitch. It's going to help him because why?
Yeah. So again, that problem becomes a little bit different when you're at the major league level versus the minor leagues, right? So A great example is a lot of our draft guys or even our DR guys. We're specifically focusing on like platoon neutral pitches, knowing that, hey, we're going to start most of you guys, right? So you're going to have to figure out how to get both handed hitters out, irrelevant of your fastball profile or your slot. So let's start teaching you these platoon neutral pitches, and then we can expand the arsenal as we go. Um, Versus a guy that's in the big leagues and in big league camp, right? It's like, okay, cool. What was your performance problem last year and how are you going to address that? Is that a location issue? Is that, okay, we can capture a little more seam effects with a slight grip change? Or is that a completely new pitch?
And then, sorry, when you're talking about bringing guys into the organization, is that part of, when you're looking at a guy who's going to come in, whether it's an amateur, whether it's a minor league free agent, whether it's a, major league trade piece you're going to trade two of the, four of this organization's top prospects for, not that I'm alluding to anyone in particular, but what goes into those, is that part of what goes into those evaluations as well, where you're working with, advanced scouting, analytics, et cetera, to be like, okay, what are the traits that these guys are going to come in with that we can work with? Is there something missing? There's that whole like, the Red Sox acquired this guy. I wonder if they think if they just tweak one thing, he's going to take off type thing. How does that inform the acquisition process?
Yeah, I think in any point acquisition, you have to ask yourself, what makes this guy really good, right? Why is he even in this position? Whether again, it's a minor league free agent, major league free agent, trade piece, international sign. Like, okay, what makes this guy special? And then understanding, okay, cool. Based on what he does so well, what do we need to add to the arsenal? Continue to have success at whatever level he's at, and then additionally project success to the big leagues.
And I guess maybe as one potential example, last year in the draft, the Red Sox drafted Peyton Toley, a guy who, it was the most money that the Red Sox had given in a draft signing bonus to a pitcher in a long time. Ian had an article that he put on our news page that was looking back several years, and it was like, look, the bonus money is spending up to the limit, but a lot of it's going to hitters, and that's how you want. You can't make a 30 a 60, right? It just doesn't work like that. When Peyton Tully got drafted, it seemed like, oh, okay, it's what you're saying. It was pretty clear right away. Here are the things Peyton Tully does well, right?
Mhm.
He's a big old boy. The extension's there. The fastball has interesting traits, etc. Is that an example? Was there anything in particular that was particularly attractive to acquiring him, that again, those traits that really stood out? And since he's come into the organization as an example, what kinds of things are you all working with him on to, accentuate those things, complement them, et cetera? How has that process looked for him so far?
Yeah, so to answer the first part of the question, yeah, like we looked at the big physical dude that had 7 feet of extension. Fastball obviously has a low vertical approach angle, and you're like, okay, there's a fastball that's going to generate swing and miss for a while, right? And then when we look at the overall arsenal, right, and we know in zone swing and miss is probably the most predictive stat we have of big league success. Right. So he's got a fastball that can already generate swing and miss, and we can add other pitches to that arsenal to continue to generate swing and miss. That was the play for a guy like Peyton Tolley and why we took him so high. It's like, okay, he's already got the fastball that generates swing and miss. We know that's rare, right? Now we can add other pieces as well to that arsenal to continue to generate swing and miss. And specifically with him, again, it goes back to kind of just let's add some platoon neutral pitches, knowing he's a left-handed pitcher and he's going to face a bunch of righties. And let's start there. And then we can, as performance problems come up, we can continue to address those.
How has that looked so far? And kind of I would say off-season training. I mean, it started in August, but as we're kind of approaching his first spring training, how has that process looked so far?
Yeah, I'm really excited to see him in game here in spring training. It's again, he works his tail off. He's a great human being, and then additionally, he can throw a fastball like no other. So I'm really excited to see him get into games and see what we can continue to do and continue to build with him.
I have two questions as follow-ups to that. The first one is, can you just kind of explain to our audience what you mean when you say the low vertical approach angle? Because I've realized it's something that we often like. We'll talk about stuff like that, release height, VAA, things like that, and I realize we probably haven't done a very good job explaining it. So I feel like you're probably more qualified to. So could you just
Do
give
our
like a
job
brief
for us,
a
Justin,
brief
please.
primer, just so they can kind of like visualize it when they're thinking of someone like Tolly?
Yep. So yeah, when we talk about like VAA, you can talk about like really steep VAA or really flat VAA, and it's essentially just the angle. So if you visualize like a MLB The Show and you throw a pitch, a normal guy's pitch would start to like kind of arc down, whereas these guys with low VAs, it just essentially stays flat because of a bunch of different factors. And then additionally, there's a lot of guys that have like Clay Holmes is a great example of a guy that has a relatively high slot that creates a very steep vertical approach angle. So that ball is on a much more downward trajectory than what the hitter is used to seeing.
Cool. Yeah. That it's a lot easier, I think, when you visualize it. Because yeah, I
For
realize
sure.
we'll often just be like, oh, this person's IVB is this or VAA is this, and then we just breeze by it. I'm realizing that might be helpful if kind
Yeah.
of like
Well,
talk about a little bit.
and it's funny too
Um,
because I can remember a point in time in the system where the Red Sox would draft these really tall guys. It's like, oh, the downward plane, and it's like, but it was downward plane that lined up with what hitters were used to seeing, and it just didn't quite work out the same way. And now it seems like it's a difference from what the hitter is used to is part of what you're looking for. Is that right?
For sure. Yeah.
and then the second follow up was about the draft, just kind of in general. I noticed this year that only one of your pitchers, you obviously very pitching heavy draft last year, only one of them ended up pitching in games, I believe, last season. Was that kind of like something that was pre-planned going in? And can you kind of walk us through what the process is with these draftees when you bring them in at first? Is it just straight into strengthening? Is that when you're going through all the biomechanics work to kind of get those workups and then start working trying to identify, hey, we need to work on this and this, or kind of what is that process like after the draft, since we didn't see a lot of these guys on the mound last year?
Yeah, we ended up getting three guys out to affiliates.
Was it three? Okay.
Yep. And
I,
then essentially with where the draft is now, with it being so late after the college season, really it's more of a risk assessment of like, okay, who do we think is built up to go to the season? And typically it's those guys that were playing summer ball.
the summer ball, yeah,
Um,
like Cole Tolbert,
yes.
yeah.
Yep. So that's kind of like, okay, we know exactly what this guy was doing. The rest of the guys, we asked them, hey, can you project out your throwing? What have you done the last 3 months? That gives us a pretty decent baseline of where they're at. And then we kind of do like an initial intake, start them on a throwing progression. We'll speed some guys up based on what we're seeing. But generally, like, really want to slow cook those guys and don't want to put them in a bad spot because we know we don't do a traditional instructs anymore, but we're going to continue to build skills all the way through to the dead period. And we have to make sure they're in a good spot for the next season.
And so when you're doing that, because do you feel like you have enough of a background from what you've seen with their college, high school, wherever, their previous, where you saw them pitch before you, that you don't need to see them come out and throw with, their current delivery, their current arsenal, that you can make any necessary changes or things that you kind of are planning on doing before seeing them on a mound in game action?
We get a pretty good snapshot. There's still a lot of stuff that changes just based on the data and the quality of the data we get back. Right? Obviously, there's few more resources in professional baseball, especially for
Yeah.
some of these like mid-major or lower tier Power Five schools. So there are still some surprises we get, but we really utilize that time a lot, like to essentially onboard them to the Red Sox way, right? It's a great opportunity to say, okay, cool, you're coming into pro ball. This whole environment's new. Let's really kind of square you up with how we go about doing things, 'cause it's slightly different than probably what they're used to or what is being done in baseball traditionally.
Yeah, because I'm sure like a guy coming from Vanderbilt, let's say, or Wake Forest, one of the big pitching factories in college, has probably had a very different experience and exposure to the technology, the terminology, things like that, than a kid who's coming from high school or, for, as you said, from one of the lower, smaller schools.
Yeah, yeah. And a lot of the like education on the player standpoint is just like, what are we looking at? What are we seeing? Let's get you up to speed with what a TrackMan report is, what an after action review is, like these types of things. Just to really, again, initiate them into the Red Sox and how we're going to go about the rest of their career.
This is kind of related to that, but so obviously I feel like over the last couple of years, these kind of like pitching factories have become more and more of the norm and become more kind of in popular culture. How do you think that's kind of changed your job when, you have guys in the offseason who maybe they go out and they'll go and completely revamp their arsenal or just do something different? Are you working in conjunction with places like that, or is that do guys often will just go off on their own and then come back and it's like, hey, this is what I'm doing now. Like, how do you balance that out, and how have those becoming more popular kind of changed how things work for you in the offseason?
Yeah, I would say early in my career, I was very much against that. And I was like, at the end of the day, the player is choosing to go to these people. Let's just make sure we're really collaborating and working
Hmm.
in conjunction because obviously we have a lot more data on that specific player than they do. And we can walk that organization or team or whatever through our thought process. And then they can walk us through their thought process. And we can typically come to a pretty good resolution of, okay, this is what we're seeing, this is what you're seing. Okay, cool, let's move forward in this direction. Because again, like I'll be the first to say we have all the data in the world, and I think we produce the best plans for our players. But at the end of the day, they're not paying to come to us, right? We're essentially paying them. They're paying to go to those facilities. Awesome. You've made the decision to go to that facility. Let's utilize them to help our players get to where they want to go. Like we're all in this for the same reason. Whether you're an agent, you're a facility, you're a Major League Baseball team, we want what's best for this player. And if they make the decision to go somewhere else, like let's work in conjunction to really drive that.
Has and you don't have to give us the specific examples, but have there ever been instances of, a guy, I'm sure it's not like a drive line or a tread or something like that, but like where a guy is going somewhere in the offseason and working on something and it's just really at kind of loggerheads with what you're trying to do you're kind of almost pushing, trying to roll the rock uphill a little bit, and then a guy comes back in the offseason and it's you've undone everything we tried to work with. I'm sure there are guys who apply themselves in the offseason better or worse than others, but how often it is, I'm sure it's not often, but does it happen where that really just kind of works at opposite uh like cross purposes with what you're trying to do with a given guy?
Yeah, I've been in a leadership position for 5 years now, and I'd say probably one or two times there's a guy that completely goes off script and gets radical and just like changes the whole thing.
Mhm.
But like the great thing about all these facilities is they're just all those guys are baseball guys, right?
Yeah.
All those facility guys, all those
Yeah.
trainers, they're just baseball guys. They want to talk baseball, right? And so having those conversations and bridging that gap is a huge part of it. We're not just like some eye in the sky. No, we're baseball guys too. Like we want to chop up, we want to chop it up, we want to talk shop, we want to, hey, what have you learned? What have we learned? Like we want to do these things, and that's been a huge um, part that's really allowed our players just to continue to grow and build relationships with those facilities or trainers or whatever it may be.
Mhm. One of the things you mentioned with guys that come into the system is teaching them maybe some of the things that they're going to be looking at and that you're looking at to help them. I feel like when I, hear people talking or see on social media when we get questions or hear interviews and things like that, people will refer to like analytics. And I feel like analytics often gets used as code for stuff I don't understand because, I think it meant one thing at one point. It's like people who read Moneyball and thought it was about walks are good, right? And it's
Mhm.
not really what Moneyball's about. It's, that was the end point of a process that was being described. When what tools, I guess, to get away from analytics, but like you mentioned like a TrackMan report, et cetera. Like, what are some of the things you're looking at in assessing a player who you're working with? We've heard about the high speed cameras, the TrackMan. Like, are some of the specific tools you've got in your toolbox when you're evaluating a player and figuring out, what's working, what's not working, so that you don't have to look at, you know, ERA or WHIP. You're looking at more advanced things, of course. What are some of those advanced things that you're assessing and you're working with players and showing them?
Yeah, so player comes in the system, the first thing we do with them is explain the rules of the game, right? For the longest time, they've been playing the ERA game. It's like, okay, that's not the game we're playing. We're playing the game of predicting future outcomes, right? And here's the things that we value and really lay those out and educate them at a very high level to again make sure they understand, hey, if I'm playing this game and this is how I'm being evaluated, right? This is how they're making their decisions whether I move or not. This is how they make their decisions of whether I'm a prospect or not, whatever it may be. And additionally, we tell them, hey, 30 other front offices are looking at this. 30 other PD groups may not be translating this to their players, but 30 other front offices are looking at a similar number that is projecting your future outcome, right? So why are we not gaming for that? Why are we not doing that if we're trying to do what's best for you? So it really starts there, and then peeling back the things that go into that, whether it be the high-speed cameras, the biomechanics and Kinetrax data that we have, the force plates, what we're doing in the weight room, what we're doing nutrition, all these different things go into, okay, cool. What are the rules of the game, and what are we ultimately gaming for?
I think we would be remiss if we had you here and didn't ask about some guys. I know we've talked about a couple of individuals, but definitely some players in the system who over the past year either, have been really interesting in coming into the system after being acquired or have taken big old steps forward. And so some guys we wanted to ask about. One that we talked about during the year with the season he had was the, system's minor league pitcher of the year was Hunter Dobbins, a guy who has really, we've talked about like changes in the the pitch mix, things that, the splinker, for example, things like
Mhm.
that. Can you talk a little bit about his development over the course of the year, what's really been successful for him and maybe, what that process has looked like for him, that has led to him, becoming a guy on the 40-man roster who's in Boston for the rookie dev program?
Yeah, no, he was Dobbins was a fun project this year. Great guy to work with. He's got a great personality. Definitely has a lot of opinions and a lot of thoughts, and I love it. We encourage it. And really just keeping him centrally focused on what's the main thing, what are we working on right now, and specifically coming into the system last year and evaluating him with a fresh set of eyes. It's like, hey, all your pitches are just like a big glob, right? Can we get some real distinct shapes, and then see how that allows us to continue to build out the arsenal. Additionally, with Dauber, um, what's the best way to put this? He kind of like throttles off the velocity a little bit, and then it will throttle it back up. And it's like, okay, cool. Can we just keep that throttle going and continue to build in the background work capacity to maintain those high levels and high velocities? Um, because love that you can run up to 98. Can we sit 97, right, and continue to push those bounds? Because again, there's an aspect of like trying to throw hard trains your body to throw hard.
Speaking of velocity, another player who was also at the rookie dev program, who's someone who he's one of the more interesting pitchers I saw last year was David Sandlin, and because I was at an outing in Portland where he had some of the nastiest stuff I think I saw all year. I think he had like 22 swinging strikes or something, but he also gave up about 6 balls at probably 110 miles an hour, including 4 home runs. And how do you kind of quantify, or I don't know if that's the right word, but how do you turn someone with his kind of raw stuff into better outcomes? Because it seems like last season, like he would have the flashes of just utter dominance. Then also, you look at the end line and it was I think 20 plus home runs, a lot of hard contact. How do you kind of blend that together to turn him into the ultimate pitcher that I think we all think he can be in the end?
Yeah, so specifically on Sandlin's season, it was definitely an interesting year. Again, we all see the raw stuff, like it's through the roof. And these are conversations we had with him throughout the year of the problem with batted ball data is it's so noisy, right? Like it takes such a huge sample size to actually say, okay, cool, you're getting barreled at a high rate. And when you get enough sample size and you really look over his last 2 years, it's relatively league average. It just seemed to really spike when he got to double A. That doesn't mean we're not addressing it. We're not working on other things. He's a guy that, again, at high velocities with a phenomenal arsenal, pounds the zone at a high rate, especially the heart of the zone at a high rate. So it's cool. We still want you to work in the strike zone, right? We want to throw nasty stuff in the zone. Can we get to some better locations with our stuff? He particularly ran into a lot of damage with his splitter that was left in the heart of the plate, as well as sweepers got banged anytime they're kind of elevated a little bit. So now it's just fine tuning some of those locations instead of building the nasty stuff. Like he's obviously got all that. He's got a 60 grade sweeper at 85 miles per hour. Um, he's got the splitter that does create some big depth. Now, can we just get him to better locations where they're going to generate those swing and miss numbers?
Ian, I'm cool with just letting you cook if you want to just, I know you've got a bunch of
Yeah,
things
I
you
mean,
want to
I'm
ask
I'm
about.
happy
Go
to
for it. I,
I
I
get
feel bad I've monopolized a lot of this.
Another player who I think is one of the more fascinating pitchers in the system is Yordan Monegro, and I think he's someone when he got a lot of buzz, obviously, because he was incredible. Like, he had what I think it was 36 straight innings. He didn't give up a run, I believe, with Greenville, and he was also one of the more unique pitchers you saw because you go out there and he would just completely pitch backwards. I think I was looking at the numbers earlier. I think it was like 70+% of his pitches are either sliders or curveballs and or sweepers. He might be a curveball guy. I'd have to go back and look. I can't remember.
Yep.
Yeah, I was about to say I'm pretty sure he's a curveball guy with that slot. How do you balance something like that with someone who can be so dominant, just throwing secondary pitches, basically pitching backwards off his fastball, with the need to kind of improve that fastball and get it to the level where it's at least it's a pitch that he's comfortable and confident enough to throw in the zone and in big situations as when necessary, especially as he moves up the ladder.
Yeah, so I think it really goes back to leaning on what his strength is,
Mm-hmm.
right? He's a guy that creates really, really steep angles with his pitches.
Yeah,
So is that fastball ever going to be an outlier pitch? Probably not, unless
probably
the
not. Yeah.
velocity really, really ticks up. So we're essentially just trying to teach him the strategy he's going to need as he continues to go up. And again, you guys are obviously thought what we did last year. Like, we went from probably throwing the most fastballs in baseball across all levels to essentially flipping that on its head. And that was a very active thing we were trying to do to help our players understand what makes them special, what makes them and gives them the best opportunity to get to where they want to go. So yeah, he was one of those guys where it's like, hey, like, yeah, your fastball is good at 95, 96. It's not great. That's okay. Like, there's other ways to make sure we're optimizing for outcomes. And that's where the gyro comes in, the curveball comes in, the splitter comes in, and optimizing those pitches in the strike zone. So and as well as continue to push velocity development with him. That was a huge goal throughout the year.
In general, so when it comes to like deciding whether a guy has a splitter or a changeup, is it kind of like a very case by case basis? Are there kind of some trends you look for that lean more guys towards one or the other? Because I noticed last year there were definitely some guys who were kind of yo-yoing back and forth. I'm assuming they were maybe trying different grips, but I'd go to one game and he's throwing something at 900 RPMs and like, oh, there's a splitter, and the next one it's 1700. That's probably a changeup. Like, can you kind of talk a little bit about that process? Because I don't necessarily have a specific player in mind, but I just noticed it with several guys last year. I guess Luis Guerrero is one, for example. He had one of my
Yeah.
favorite splitters a couple years ago, and now he's throwing a kind of more of a changeup.
Yeah, so really just understanding how the hand interacts with the fastball is super important with essentially setting the initial direction we're going to go with, and then understanding, okay, cool, how is now this new grip, whether it's a splitter or a changeup, interacting with the hands to optimize for seam effects or kicking the axis down to an area where we're getting a little bit more depth or run or whatever we're looking for. It really starts with the fastball and understanding what that's doing and what the hand's doing at the highest intent, right? Because I think historically we thought guys can really manipulate their hands. But again, as we're trying to throw harder and harder, let's just bias what they already do and then allow them to keep that kind of hand speed and not have to manipulate the hand through space to try to get to these shapes or different axes or different orientations.
Chris, you have a question right now for one?
No, I'm just listening and loving this. I don't know if I mean there are plenty of guys I would want to ask about too. I mean, I don't know if you've got another guy, go for it. Otherwise, I'll jump in with someone.
You can jump in. I have one of my personal cheese balls that I would be obligated to, or I can just ask now.
Yeah, go for it.
Can you talk about what makes Hayden Mullins' fastballs so hard to hit?
That thing kind of just explodes out of his hand. Um, it's not like a VAA type thing. There might be a little bit there that it's playing. It's not really like a huge extension thing. It just like kind of accelerates in this direction to the up and arm side area, which not a lot of guys can do. Um, and yeah, specifically him, that's why we've really struggled to get to a more depthy changeup
Mhm.
because of just that fastball profile. It's really hard for him to now either continue to overpronate to maximize for some seam effects there, or can we actually get him to cut the ball a little bit? But that's what makes his fastball good is what makes the rest of the arsenal really hard to dial in.
No, that makes sense. It's just he's one of my favorite pitchers to see. Just watching his fastball because I like a ghost fastball. Like it's just guys, the swings he gets are remarkable. Because as you said, like when you look at the traits, like good extension, but it's not like doesn't blow you away in any of those categories. I don't think. But then you look at the whiff rate and you're like, oh wait, what? How does this kind of mold? But I think it just shows that pitching is so complex. And I think over the years, I started kind of doing this back more than a decade ago, and it's just kind of amazing how much more is known about pitching now than even I would say 5 years ago. Like the advances in technology, as you said, the increases, like the importance of science, nutrition, all the different aspects that are brought in. Like even like spin rate wasn't a thing. Like in the public eyes, I'm sure it was behind the scenes, but like 10 years ago, we weren't talking about spin rate when you were going to games. And I just think it's interesting how far pitching has come developmentally, and it's just talking to you. It's really interesting hearing all these different things because, yeah, I mean, a lot of this stuff is not things you would be thinking about even like 5 years ago, frankly, on our end. So it's just amazing how far it's come.
Yeah, no, and I'll give all the credit in the world to the people I joined the Twins with. Josh Kalk, probably the godfather of all this stuff. He was scraping data from his home in Bluefield before anybody knew you could scrape data. Learned a lot from him, and then obviously a lot of those people over at the Twins that have really helped produce a lot of internal value. Learned a lot from those people, and really helped my career and get me to where I'm at today.
I guess one last one from me, Justin, and we'll let you go. And I don't know if Ian will have one more or not, but I'm curious: is there anyone in the system, or is there a guy or two who you think, I would say maybe doesn't get enough love, or doesn't get enough attention? Attention can be relative, but is there anyone in particular who not a sleeper because you're coaching all these guys. It's like asking you to pick a favorite kid, I guess. But is there anyone in particular who stands out to you as maybe a guy who you think is ready to pop, who no one's really on yet, or no one's really noticing, or who has put in particularly good work on any kind of particular aspect that you think is really going to start paying off, that's worth our listeners keeping an eye, and maybe us. I'm not. I'll be honest. Worth keeping an eye on going forward.
Yeah, that's a tough
It
question because
is.
right,
It's not
they're like
fair.
your kids. You want all of them to have success. I'm really interested to see how this college group that we brought in, the 14 arms or whatever, really
Mhm.
ends up showing up this year. I think there's a lot of sleepers in that group. Like the culture that was built down in Fort Myers by our crew down there is incredible, and all those guys are drinking the Kool-Aid. So I think there's going to be a lot of surprises from that group of like, okay, this guy was a 15th, 16th rounder. Where did this come from? In addition to those high round draft picks also kind of hitting their stride. Um, Trying to think holistically through the system. Again, you guys do such a great job. All these guys are talked about, whether it's Paez or Ingracia or Wee Hunt or Early or Sandlin or Dobbins. Um, yeah, there's a really nice crop here of guys, and um, again, a lot of these guys are already down Fort Myers working on the next steps of their career and really putting in the time. And that was a huge part I wanted to put in this year was getting guys on site in Fort Myers as soon as possible and getting as many guys as possible. Because we have great coaches, we have great resources, so let's give these guys the best shot to maximize their development, maximize their potential, and give access to all this stuff.
Ian, anything else? I'm good.
No, I think I mean you hit
This is
we hit on
awesome.
everything. Yeah, that was
This
awesome.
is
I
awesome.
really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, Justin, this was terrific, man. We look forward. We'll make sure we say hi to you while we're down at the fort in March. We look forward to seeing you down there. But in the meantime, best of luck with the rest of the off season and get ready for 2025, man.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, appreciate you guys having me on. These were great questions. Made me think a little bit, but yeah, really appreciate your guys' time and yeah, look forward to seeing you guys in person.
Excellent. Thanks, Justin. We appreciate it.